And then here's just a nice casual shot of the drummer here. And this is what this lens is really good for. 3/4, full lens. Nothing wrong with using this as a close-up either. Here we're looking at the drummer at f2.8. So I'm open up all the way. And then also we're zoomed in all the way to 75mm too. So we get just a little bit of background blur since he's leaning against the house anyway. So we're not going to get a whole lot of background blur here. But this just demonstrates the sharpness of it. And I always like photographing guys with a little bit of a beard or stubble because it's really a good way to test the lens. So I wanted to test the lens and see how the background blur would be. So here we're photographing the bass player. And we're set, again, full zoom at 75mm, open up all the way at f2.8, and you can see some nice background blur right here. And again, here's the sax player. We're focused on the sax player. Again, f2.8, same setting, 75mm. We got nice focus on the sax player, and the background is nicely out of focus here, especially considering it's a mid-telephoto lens. So as the sun went down and I was depending on the stage lighting, I didn't want to use any flash for these. So I just used the available stage lighting here. And in this particular one, again, f2.8. And here we're set wide at 28mm. So we get a little bit more depth of field. And of course, because this is very, very dark here, I put the ISO at 6400 and I'm hand holding this, well actually handheld on a monopod. And here I'm set to a 25th of a second. So I had to sort of time the way they were holding their instruments or going with the beat. So when they stopped or like a downstroke, I would choose the best time to click the shutter. So you want to be careful of that too, unless you want some background blur, which I use sometimes also. But that's your choice. But anyway, this is f2.8 wide at 28mm. And here we're at the same setting, 28mm at f2.8, and we have a 40th of a second here. So we have a little bit more shutter speed to stop the action. And again, we're on a monopod here. I believe just about all the ones that we're taking at the jam here were taken using a monopod. And then coming in just a little bit closer here, we're at 62mm now as we get the lead guitar player playing a solo. And of course, we're still at f2.8. However, and because it's kind of dark here, the shutter speed turned out to be a 1/13th of a second. Very, very slow since we have a lot of movement here and they're playing music by Kiss. So it's pretty exciting stuff and everybody's jumping around and stuff. But we get a little bit of blur here, and that's motion blur from them moving around, and especially at a 1/13th of a second. So here again, I'm set to 75mm f2.8, shooting wide open again. And of course, I'm focused on the drummer here. And this is a good thing to point out to maybe some of the newer photo enthusiasts out there, that if you do want background blur, and many people say, I want to get background blur, you're also going to get foreground blur. So you want to keep that in mind. And then also you want to keep in mind the faster your lens. So if you're shooting at f2.8, or say you have an 85mm at 1.4, you're going to get quite a few out of focus photographs, especially if they're moving or you're moving around, because you have such a shallow depth of field. So keep that all in mind. So there's many times if it's an important shot, if I don't shoot it at 2.8, I'll shoot it maybe 3.2 or 3.5 or sometimes even f4, just to make sure I get enough focus out of that. But here we can see we're focused on the drummer, and of course we can see the background slightly out of focus, and we can also see the foreground out of focus. And then here's another great example of that, where I focused on the sax player, and again, he got a little bit stubble, and I focused on that. And then we can see how clear that is, and then we can see how much the background's out of focus. But also you can see the foreground, his saxophone, which he held a little bit in front of him, just a little bit. The saxophone is out of focus because we're, again, photographing wide open at f2.8. So with that setting, we have a very narrow depth of field. So, and again, 75mm at f2.8. Now, even though they call this lens a macro, you're sort of limited because the closest focusing distance, I believe, was just about 13 inches. So you can get close, but not as close as you can with a real macro lens. So just keep that in mind. So you could use this for small product and jewelry photography, as I was doing here. And these were taken, again, using the D7200 with the Tamron lens. But here I have the setting set to f16 because I'm shooting very close. So I wanted to get a little bit more depth of field since we're shooting very close. One thing that you want to keep in mind, when you come very close to your subject or the thing that you're photographing, that's going to decrease your depth of field also, which means it's going to give you more background blur. So you want to make sure sometimes when you're photographing a product, sometimes you want to get things a little bit more in focus. Other times, of course, you can isolate the item by getting just a certain part of it in focus and just blurring everything else out. That's fine too. But I did want to mention that you can do some close-ups with this lens. It's just not a really strong macro. Okay, well, I hope this information helped you just in case you're deciding on a mid-telephoto fast lens at a good price, especially if somebody's on a real tight budget. You could pick these up on eBay for, like I said, between $200 to $300. So anyway, thank you for watching and have a great day. Good night.